what temporary protection is about. So, who is protected, for how long, and what rights it entails. So, who is covered? Any Ukrainian national that was residing in Ukraine before the 24th or on the 24th of February 2022 and comes into the European Union is protected by the Temporary Protection Directive. Also, third country nationals or stateless persons that were residing in Ukraine on the basis of refugee status or any other equivalent protection. So any protection in Ukraine, we have what is called complementary protection, so it's given to third country nationals. We had a list of nationalities. We know the Afghans, Palestinians, and there are all the Belarusians as well, that were residing in Ukraine or on or before 24th of February 2022, and they come into the European Union. They are also covered. So both of the Ukrainian nationals and of the third country nationals with refugee status. Their family members are covered. And we have quite a generous definition of what a family member is. It includes, obviously, the husband, the wife, the dependent children, but also partners, so you don't have to be married, provided in the member state where the person arrives, recognize same-sex marriages as such, or equivalent same-sex marriages. And we also have people that might not be the father, the mother, or the children, but were dependent on these persons when they left Ukraine. Imagine you have an aunt that is handicapped and he was living with you when you were in Ukraine. This person will also be covered under the Temporary Protection Directive. So quite a generous definition of family members. In addition, for third country nationals that were living in Ukraine on the basis of a permanent residence permit, and they come into the European Union, again, the same date, 24th of February 2022, they will be covered. Member states have a choice to cover them under the temporary protection or to give them adequate protection under national law. But there is a condition, and this that they are unable to return in safe and durable conditions to their country of origin. Because we know that the conditions in the country of origin might not be so easy to determine. And adequate protection under national law is not exactly the same in terms of rights as the temporary protection gives, but it has to be close. It has to include elements that are in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, like dignity, housing, and basic standards of living. It's not the same rights. It will be, probably in some member states will be the same rights, in other countries will be lower rights. It's not equivalent, but it has to be protection. So any third country national that was in Ukraine living on the basis of a permanent residence permit, they are protected. For how long is this protection? This protection is for a year, and this year is not subjective, it's objective, meaning that it is from the 4th of March 2022, when is the day that the Council agreed or adopted this decision, until the 4th of March 2023. So it doesn't matter if the person comes in January 2023. The protection will be then for just 3 months, until the 4th of March 2023. If between now and the 4th of March 2023, the situation has not improved, this protection will be automatically extended for 6 months twice, so for another year. For this reason, we are recommending member states to grant temporary protection for 2 years, so that there will not be a need to do automatic or non-automatic prolongations. What is covered? Temporary protection is, the objective is really to give everybody a set of rights that will be enough to avoid that you have to apply for asylum. Which rights are we talking about? Residence rights. And these residence rights, they last as long as the protection. So in principle, 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years in the worst case. Access to the labour market. With temporary protection, you have access to the labour market immediately. Of course, the member state might ask you, first you have to have the residence permit, and we are trying to encourage member states to reduce it to the minimum, and with registration already give you access to the labour market without having to wait for the residence permit, but this is a bit in the hands of the member states. but residence rights for at least a year, 2 years, or worst case, 3 years. Access to the labour market, again for the same period of time, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. You also have the right to housing and to get accommodation and to get standard of living. The member state can nonetheless see if you are working, if you're working or if you're a beneficiary of temporary protection and you can sustain yourselves, then the member state can decide not to give any allowance. But first, the most important is you have something that allows you to live in a dignified way. You have also access to the health system, but also only to emergency. But we can see the member states, in principle, they are also being more generous, and we are asking member states to please grant access to the health system as you were nationals of the European Union or legal residents, because at the end this is what you will be, you are legal residents in the European Union, and access to education. The children as well, obviously, they have, if they are unaccompanied, they have to get a guardian, and we are asking member states to give immediate access to education with the least papers possible and just put the kids in school as the first step. For people that are above 18 years old, then we are also asking member states to grant access to their education systems, but again this would depend a bit on each member state and how they grant access. In some member states, the member states are very generous and you can have access to university and higher education for free. In other member states you will have to do it as in the same conditions as a third country national. But this is, at least from the Commission side, we're trying to encourage member states to be as generous as they can be and treat people that are benefiting from temporary protection with the same rights. Rights that are not included explicitly in the decision, but you have. The people have the freedom to choose the member state in which they want to benefit from temporary protection. So, it's not the country where you first enter, it's the country you choose. And for that, obviously, we'll have to facilitate the travel, because most of the people will go through Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania, and then from there, many people stay there, and then they move maybe afterwards. So this is a message we really want to pass, that is that you can choose.
In preventing perhaps a bit of trafficking as well. Of course, I mean, the solidarity and support from all member states, neighboring countries and the civil society has been great support, and also something that is very, very highly appreciated. However, there are other forces, as you know, individual people, but also networks who are trying to exploit the situation. So for now it has been a main focus on prevention, and that means then in cooperation with member states, Moldova and Ukraine as well, to raise awareness, to ensure that people coming into the EU are aware of the risks and what they can do to prevent and to avoid falling into the hands of the traffickers. There are leaflets from the civil society organizations, I'm sure you're aware of that. And on the Commission web page as well, there's a dedicated section on what you can think about and how to protect yourself. For instance, when you travel, hiding your money, memorizing your credit card details, etc. And also contact details, so helplines and an organization that can help you. There is, of course, a big focus on children, and in particular unaccompanied children and so-called separated children. There we do advocate that these children are registered, and not only them, but also who is in contact with them, who might transport them to their other destination, where they will be in accommodation, and the final destination. It's also super important that this information is shared with, between the member states, so that we can have a trace of what's happening. For so-called suspicious circumstances or something like that, it is also super important that it's shared with local authorities and police, and of course also through the EU instruments that are there in Europol. This way we can also monitor if there is sort of bigger networks at play.